My daughter-in-law wants to move out and says she'll never give me a single cent of support. My name is Margaret Ellis, and the first time my daughter-in-law looked me in the eyes and said, "We're moving out, and don't ever expect a single cent of support from us," I felt my chest cave in, as if someone had pulled the air out of my lungs. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The living room that day felt colder than any December storm. The curtains were drawn, sunlight cutting in sharp angles across the carpet. My son Daniel sat on the couch, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles looked white. He didn't look at me. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the floor as if studying the fibers of the rug was more bearable than facing his own mother. And there she was, my daughter-in-law Vanessa, beautiful on the outside, sharp-voiced and unyielding on the inside. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, her lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "We'll be moving soon," she said, her tone light, almost playful. "And just to be clear, Margaret, don't expect a single cent from us. We have our own lives. You should take care of yourself." Her words were like shards of ice. I felt the blood rush from my face. For years, I had imagined this home, our shared roof, our blended family, as a place where love would multiply, where respect would keep us knitted together. I'd pictured holidays at the dinner table, grandchildren running through the halls, laughter echoing from room to room. But in a single breath, Vanessa had reduced me to nothing more than a burden. I wanted to speak. My lips parted, but the words caught like thorns in my throat. I turned to Daniel, searching his face, begging silently for him to say something, anything. He was my son, my blood, the boy I had carried through sickness and scraped knees, through late nights of homework and early mornings of school. Surely he would defend me. But Daniel only rubbed his forehead and muttered, "Let's not start this again, Mom. It's better this way." Better this way. My mind reeled. Better for who? For him, for her? Certainly not for me. I remember the first time I met Vanessa. She came into our lives like a whirlwind, with her glossy hair and her laughter that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Daniel was smitten. His eyes followed her like she was the only star in his night sky. I welcomed her with open arms, thinking I had gained a daughter. But what I mistook for charm was something else, entirely control. Vanessa had a way of bending conversations, of twisting situations, so that Daniel always stood on her side. She dressed her manipulation in sweetness, always calling me Mom in front of neighbors or relatives, painting a picture of unity that was nothing more than theater. It took years for the cracks to show. Small comments about my old-fashioned habits, her disapproval of how I cooked certain meals, the way she rolled her eyes when I asked Daniel for help around the house. Each moment was a drip of poison in a glass of water, subtle, almost invisible, until one day the taste was bitter enough to choke me. So there I was, staring at the woman who had dismantled my family's harmony piece by piece, telling me with a smile that she owed me nothing. I wanted to scream, to remind her of the countless sacrifices I had made, not for her, but for Daniel, for the life they shared. Did she know that I had worked 3 jobs at once when Daniel was in college, just to make sure he didn't drop out under the weight of debt? Did she know that I had skipped meals so he could eat, patched the soles of my shoes until they were more thread than leather, and tucked away my dreams just so his could breathe? And now here she stood, telling me I was entitled to nothing. I drew in a shaky breath, my hands trembling as I clasped them together. "I never asked you for anything," I said finally, my voice thin but sharp. "But I thought at the very least I deserved respect." Vanessa tilted her head, her eyes glinting like glass. Respect has to be earned. And you've made it very clear, Margaret, that you can't live without interfering in our lives. We don't owe you a thing." Her words sliced through me, each syllable like a knife. And still Daniel said nothing. The silence stretched until it wrapped itself around my chest, suffocating me. I rose from my chair slowly, every bone in my body stiff with age and indignation. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and stared out at the empty street. I could see the neighbors' houses, families gathering for dinner, porch lights glowing warm against the dusk. I wondered briefly if those mothers felt as invisible as I did in that moment. I pressed my palm to the cool glass and thought, so this is how it begins. The slow unraveling of ties, the cutting of cords I had spent my life weaving. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance, every silence. I heard Daniel's voice again. It's better this way. My heart twisted. What was better? Was it better to discard the woman who had raised him? Was it better to pretend that the years of sacrifice no longer mattered? Was it better to treat me as though I were dead while still alive? I could feel bitterness building in my chest, not just against Vanessa, but against Daniel too. His silence was worse than her words. Her cruelty was sharp and expected, but his indifference, his refusal to shield me, was the wound that refused to close. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea untouched and growing cold. Vanessa breezed in her perfume heavy in the air, her heels clicking against the tile. She glanced at me with that same faint smile. "Don't look so grim, Margaret," she said. "It's not like we're abandoning you. We're just choosing our own path." I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. Choosing their own path meant leaving me behind. Choosing their own path meant erasing me from the equation. And for the first time, I realized if I didn't protect myself, no one else would. That was the moment a seed was planted in me. A quiet, unshakable resolve. If Vanessa thought she could discard me like yesterday's news, and if Daniel thought he could turn his back on me without consequence, then they had underestimated me. Because I may have been old, I may have been tired, but I had not yet forgotten how to fight. And my story, my revenge, was only just beginning. I sat at the kitchen table long after Vanessa left the house that morning, her perfume still clinging to the air like a ghost. My tea had gone cold, untouched, and the clock ticked on the wall with an almost mocking rhythm. Every tick reminded me of how quickly time had passed, of how my life had been consumed with sacrifices that no one seemed to remember. Daniel's words replayed in my mind. "It's better this way, Mom. Better this way." I whispered the phrase under my breath, letting it taste bitter on my tongue. Better for whom? Certainly not for me. Not for the woman who had poured her life into him. It felt strange, almost cruel, to realize that the boy I had once cradled in my arms now stood beside a woman who openly dismissed me, and he chose silence over defense. He wasn't just my son anymore, he was her husband first. And that truth hurt more than any insult Vanessa had thrown at me. When Daniel was born, the world was smaller and heavier. I was just 23, barely more than a child myself, with a husband who cared more for the bottom of a bottle than the child he had fathered. Within months, I was alone, abandoned, left with an infant who cried through the nights, while I clutched him to my chest, whispering promises I had no idea how to keep. "I'll always take care of you," I told him in those dark hours. "You'll never be alone." And I meant it. I worked mornings at the elementary school, afternoons tutoring neighborhood kids, and nights waiting tables at a diner just to make ends meet. My body was constantly exhausted, my hands raw from scrubbing and cleaning, but when I looked at Daniel's sleeping face, I told myself it was worth it. Every ache, every missed meal, every worn pair of shoes, it was worth it if it meant he could grow without the weight I carried. There were times I went without food so he could eat. I remember one winter when the pipes burst in our tiny apartment and I spent every dollar of savings on repairs. For a month, I ate nothing but stale bread and watered-down soup, just to stretch what little we had. Daniel never knew. He was too busy playing with his toy cars, his belly full, his smile intact. Those sacrifices were my silent badge of honor. They were my love, stitched into the fabric of his life. But now, sitting in that kitchen, staring at the faded linoleum tiles, I wondered if he even remembered. Vanessa often mocked my frugality, though she never said it outright. She would make little comments. It's so quaint that you still clip coupons, Margaret, or we don't really need to save leftovers. It feels old-fashioned. What she didn't understand, what Daniel no longer seemed to recall, was that thriftiness wasn't a choice for me. It was survival. Daniel had grown up on hand-me-down clothes and shoes repaired more times than I could count. I had sewed patches on his school backpack until the fabric was more patch than original. I never took vacations, never bought myself new dresses, never indulged in luxuries. Everything was for him, and he thrived. He went to a good university. He became the man Vanessa now adored. All of that came from the foundation I built, yet here I was, treated like a beggar at my own table. That afternoon, Daniel came home alone. He slipped in quietly, almost guiltily, and set his briefcase by the door. I was in the living room knitting, though the yarn trembled in my hands. "Daniel," I said softly, not looking up. "Do you remember when you were 8 years old and broke your leg? You fell from the tree in Mrs. Johnson's yard." He chuckled, faintly caught off guard. "Of course I do. You carried me to the car. You wouldn't even let the neighbors help." I looked at him, then my eyes heavy. "Do you remember how long I stayed with you at the hospital? How I didn't leave your side not once, even when the nurses told me to get some rest?" His smile faded. "Mom, I did everything alone, Daniel," I whispered. "Everything. Your father walked away and I was all you had. I fought for you, sacrificed for you, gave you every piece of myself. And now when she insults me, when she says I deserve nothing, you say nothing." Daniel rubbed his face with his hands, his shoulders tense. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," I said firmly. "A son defends his mother. A son doesn't let his wife cut her down in her own home." His silence was answer enough. That night, I sat in my room with an old photo album spread across my lap. The pages smelled of dust and time. Each picture told a story of sacrifice. Daniel's first birthday cake, which I baked from scratch with borrowed flour and sugar. His first day of school, where his smile was bright, even though his shoes were scuffed and 2 sizes too big. His graduation, where I had sewn my own dress from discounted fabric so I wouldn't embarrass him in front of his friends. I traced my fingers along his young face in those pictures, searching for the boy who once clung to my hand, who once whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mommy." Where had he gone? Now he stood as a man, tall and successful, but blind to the foundation beneath his feet. And worse, he let the woman he married dismiss the very person who built it. The weight of betrayal sat heavy on my chest. Not just Vanessa's cruelty, but Daniel's silence. Silence can be louder than words. It screams of abandonment. It echoes with the sound of indifference. And in that silence, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. I had given my life to a son who now saw me as expendable. That night, as the house grew quiet and the walls closed in around me, I whispered to myself, if the sacrifices of a lifetime mean nothing to them, then I must make sure they remember. It wasn't anger alone that drove the thought, it was survival. Because if I allowed their words and silence to define me, I would vanish into the shadows of my own home. And Margaret Ellis was not born to vanish. The days that followed felt like living in a house divided where every hallway carried echoes of unspoken resentment. I tried to carry on with dignity, cleaning, cooking, knitting, tending to my small garden, but the air inside our home had shifted. It wasn't just tense. It was hostile, like a storm waiting to break. Vanessa no longer pretended to hide her disdain. The polite mask she had once worn in front of relatives or neighbors was gone. In its place was a sharp, unyielding cruelty that cut through me with every word and glance. One morning, as I folded the laundry, she stood in the doorway sipping coffee from a delicate porcelain cup. She watched me silently for a moment, then let out a laugh that was soft, but heavy with mockery. "You know, Margaret," she said, setting her cup down on the counter sometimes, "I wonder why you even bother doing all this. You're retired. You should just sit quietly. Stop trying to act like you matter so much." I froze, a pair of Daniel's socks clutched in my hand. Her words weren't shouted, but they landed like stones on my chest. I'm part of this household, I replied carefully, trying to steady my voice. I do what I can. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, her smile thin. Part of this household? Let's be honest, you're more like a guest we can't get rid of. Living off your little pension, expecting us to carry you. It's pitiful, really. My hands trembled. She knew my pension was small, barely enough to cover my medicine and modest personal needs. I had never asked her for money, never once demanded a thing. Yet she wielded it against me like a weapon, stripping me of dignity with casual cruelty. Daniel walked in just then, adjusting his tie before work. For a fleeting moment, I thought he might hear the sharpness in her tone, see the wound she carved into me with those words. But Vanessa turned to him with a sweet smile, her voice dripping with honey. Darling, do you want me to pack you some lunch for the office? He kissed her cheek, oblivious, and said, That'd be great. Thanks, babe. And just like that, the mask returned for him. For me, only the cruelty remained. I began to notice her strategy. She never unleashed her venom in front of Daniel. To him, she was affectionate, playful, supportive. But when his back was turned, her words became daggers slicing at my sense of worth. At dinner one evening, she leaned across the table and said, You know, Daniel, we really should start saving more aggressively. After all, we don't want to end up like some people who rely on others just to survive. Her eyes flicked toward me as she said it, her lips curling with satisfaction. Daniel chuckled, not catching the barb. You're right, we should. Maybe we can sit down this weekend and look over the budget. I clenched my fork so tightly it nearly bent. My son couldn't see it, but I felt every strike of her words. There's a unique pain in being mocked for your age, your limitations, the life you've lived. It isn't just insult, it's erasure. One afternoon, as I struggled to lift a heavy box of books to dust the shelf, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She smirked, crossing her arms. Careful, Margaret, she said. At your age, one wrong move and you'll break a hip. Then what, expect us to take care of you? I set the box down slowly, my breathing shallow. Her words weren't just cruel, they were a threat. I've never expected you to take care of me, I said quietly. She stepped closer, her perfume filling the room. Good. Because you'll never get that from us. Not a dime. Not an ounce of effort. Remember that. Her eyes held mine, cold and unflinching, as if daring me to fight back. But I stayed silent because deep down I knew she wanted my reaction. She wanted me broken, begging, humiliated. And I refused to give her that satisfaction. But silence comes at a cost. That night, lying in bed, I felt the weight of her words pressing on me like stones stacked upon my chest. A guest we can't get rid of. Pitiful. At your age, you'll break a hip. Each phrase replayed in my mind until it burned into my thoughts. I thought of all the years I had worked, the sacrifices that left my body tired and my hands worn. I thought of the students I taught, the lives I shaped, the son I raised alone. And now, to be reduced to nothing more than a burden in my own home, it was a cruelty I could barely bear. The next morning, I overheard Vanessa on the phone with a friend. Her laughter echoed down the hall. She's always hovering, she said, her voice dripping with annoyance, like some sad little shadow. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can stand it. Daniel won't say it, but I know he feels the same. We'll be gone soon, and she can rot here with her tiny pension. Not my problem. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears pricking my eyes. Not my problem. That was how she saw me. Not as family, not as someone worthy of care or respect. Just a problem to be discarded. That evening, I confronted her in the kitchen. My hands trembled, but I forced my voice steady. Vanessa, I said, I don't deserve this. I've done nothing but welcome you into my home, into my family. I've never asked you for anything. She turned slowly, her lips curling into that familiar smirk. And that's exactly what you'll keep getting from us, Margaret. Nothing. Her laughter rang in my ears as she walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching the edge of the counter to steady myself. I sat alone in the dark living room, staring at the photographs on the wall, pictures of Daniel as a child, of birthdays, graduations, holidays, moments filled with love, laughter, sacrifice. And now here I was, mocked for the very life I had given. I whispered to myself, If this is how they see me, then perhaps it's time I show them who I really am. Because cruelty, when endured too long, breeds something dangerous resolve. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The night air in the house carried a heavy stillness broken only by the creak of old wood and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I waited until Vanessa went out with her friends before I gathered my courage to speak to Daniel. I had rehearsed the words in my mind all day, each phrase carefully chosen, each sentence sharpened with the weight of truth. I found him in the living room sitting on the couch with his laptop open, glasses perched on his nose. His tie was loosened, his face pale with fatigue from another long day at work. For a moment I hesitated. He looked so much like the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap while I graded papers late into the night. My heart clenched. "Daniel," I said softly, stepping into the room. He looked up startled, then forced a tired smile. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" I sat down across from him, folding my hands tightly in my lap. "We need to talk." The smile faded. He shut his laptop slowly, as though bracing for impact. "About what?" "You know what?" I replied, my voice trembling despite my effort to hold it steady. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes darted toward the hallway where Vanessa usually appeared, as if afraid she would overhear. "I can't keep living like this, Daniel," I continued. "The way she speaks to me, the way she mocks me, it's unbearable. And worse than her words is your silence." He exhaled sharply and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mom, please, don't start this again." "Start what?" "Defending myself. Asking for the bare minimum of respect in my own home. It's not that simple." His voice was flat, rehearsed. "It is that simple." I leaned forward, my eyes burning. "When she insults me, you say nothing. When she tells me I'm worthless, you let her words hang in the air unchallenged. Do you know how that feels, Daniel? To look at your son, the boy you raised, the man you sacrificed everything for, and see him choose silence over his mother." Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the carpet. "Mom, you don't understand. If I confront her, it'll just make things worse. She'll lash out at me too. It's easier if I just stay quiet." I stared at him in disbelief. "Easier for who?" "Easier for you so you don't have to deal with conflict. Easier for her so she can keep humiliating me. Do you ever think about what it's like for me?" His shoulders slumped. "You're exaggerating. She doesn't mean half the things you think she does. She's under stress. Work bills, everything. You're taking it too personally." The words hit me harder than any insult Vanessa had ever thrown. Dismissal. That was all my pain amounted to in his eyes. I rose from my chair, pacing the room as anger bubbled up inside me. "Too personally, Daniel. I carried you in my arms when your father left us. I worked myself to the bone to make sure you never went without. I went hungry so you could eat. I stayed awake through the night to comfort you when you were sick. And now, when all I ask for is respect, you tell me I'm taking it too personally." His face reddened. "Stop bringing up the past. I didn't ask you to do those things." The words sliced me open. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment the room spun. Did he really just say that? "You didn't ask," I whispered. "Of course you didn't ask. You were a child. You couldn't ask. That's what it means to be a mother. You don't wait for permission to sacrifice. You give because you love. Because it's the only way." I sank back into the chair, trembling. "And now you throw it back in my face." Daniel's expression shifted, guilt flickering across his features. But just as quickly, he buried it under a mask of calm indifference. "Mom, I'm tired. I don't want to fight about this. Can we just drop it?" "Drop it!" My voice cracked. "You want me to swallow her cruelty in silence the way you do. You want me to pretend it doesn't exist." He stood abruptly, pacing now himself. "I can't be the referee between you two. I love you both. But if you keep pushing, you'll force me to choose, and you won't like the choice I make." The threat hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own son, the boy I raised with my bare hands, was warning me not to push him too far, or else he'd stand against me. I felt a chill seep into my bones. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "She speaks, you stay silent. I speak, you threaten me with abandonment. Is that what our bond has come to?" Daniel didn't answer. He ran a hand through his hair and muttered, "I can't do this right now," before retreating down the hall, shutting the bedroom door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking felt like a final judgment. I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, my hands trembling in my lap. The silence pressed down on me heavier than any words could. Vanessa's cruelty wounded me, yes, but Daniel's silence crushed me. Because silence from a stranger is nothing. Silence from your own child is betrayal. I thought back to nights when he was small, when he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let go, Mommy." I had held him then, whispering promises of safety. But now, years later, it was he who had let go of me, of everything I thought we shared. That night, I wept quietly into my pillow. Not for Vanessa's insults, but for the boy I had lost somewhere along the way. A boy who had grown into a man too afraid to defend the mother who gave him everything. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, one thought burned brighter than all the others. If Daniel would not fight for me, then I would have to fight for myself. And from that moment on, the silence in the house was no longer just theirs, it was mine too. But mine was not silence of surrender. It was silence of waiting, of planning. Because one day they would hear my voice again, and it would not tremble. The first signs of my isolation were small, so small that if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have brushed them off as coincidences. But I've lived long enough to know that cruelty rarely begins with an explosion. It starts with whispers, with subtle slights, with little exclusions that grow bolder when no one stops them. It began at the dinner table. Once meals had been shared, affairs. I cooked, Vanessa cooked sometimes, Daniel pitched in when he wasn't too tired. We would sit together, and though the conversation often revolved around their lives and work, I felt present, included. But gradually I noticed the shift. One evening I entered the kitchen to set the table, only to find that Vanessa had already done it: 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 sets of silverware. My place was missing. "Vanessa," I said softly, trying to keep my voice neutral, "you forgot my plate." She turned, her expression feigning surprise. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be eating with us tonight. You usually eat early, don't you?" "No," I replied, my hands trembling as I reached for a plate. "I eat when everyone eats." Her smile was tight, her eyes sharp. "Well, next time let me know. I wouldn't want to make assumptions." But the truth was, she wanted me gone from that table. And Daniel. He just sat there staring at his phone, pretending not to notice. The next time, it wasn't the plate. It was the food itself. I had spent the afternoon preparing a simple stew, something hearty, something that reminded me of the meals I used to make for Daniel when he was a boy. The smell filled the house, and for a moment I felt the old warmth return. But when dinner rolled around, Vanessa wrinkled her nose. "Honestly, Margaret, do you always have to cook such heavy food? Daniel and I prefer lighter meals. We already ordered sushi." "You don't mind, do you?" She placed 2 glossy containers on the table, ignoring the pot simmering on the stove. I stared at her, my heart sinking. She had dismissed not just the food, but the effort, the memory, the love woven into every ingredient. Daniel glanced at me briefly, then at the stew, then back at Vanessa. "Maybe we can have both," he offered weakly. "No need," she said firmly. "The sushi is enough." And just like that, the meal I had poured myself into became invisible, as though it never existed. I ate alone in the kitchen while they laughed over their takeout in the dining room. Conversations followed the same pattern. At first, they included me out of politeness. Vanessa would ask how my day was, then quickly steer the topic toward her work, her friends, her ambitions. Daniel nodded along, adding his own comments, laughing when she made a joke. But soon they stopped asking me anything at all. One evening, I sat with them in the living room, knitting quietly, hoping to be part of the atmosphere. They discussed their weekend plans, going to a concert, visiting friends, maybe even taking a short trip. "Where should we stay?" Vanessa asked. There's that boutique hotel downtown, Daniel replied. It'd be nice for a change. I smiled faintly, daring to interject. There's a lovely bed and breakfast just outside of town. I went there once years ago. The gardens are beautiful, and the food. Vanessa cut me off with a wave of her hand. That sounds quaint, Margaret. But we want something modern, trendy. You wouldn't really understand. The word stung. You wouldn't understand. With a single sentence, she had pushed me out of their world as though my age, my tastes, my experiences had no value. Daniel didn't defend me, he just nodded. Even family gatherings, once a source of joy, became another arena for my erasure. When relatives visited, Vanessa played the role of perfect hostess. She offered drinks, told stories, laughed brightly while I lingered at the edge of the room, barely acknowledged. At one birthday celebration, as cousins gathered and children ran around the backyard, I noticed how Vanessa subtly positioned herself as the center of attention. She passed out slices of cake, she organized games, she told everyone about Daniel's promotion. I stood by the doorway holding a plate, waiting for someone to notice me. No one did. Later, when I tried to join a conversation, Vanessa interjected smoothly. Margaret, why don't you go sit down? You've been on your feet a lot today. Her words sounded considerate, but I knew better. It wasn't care, it was dismissal. She wanted me seated, silent, out of sight. And everyone nodded politely as though she were right. The isolation grew in other ways too. The house itself became a map of exclusion. They stopped telling me their schedules. Sometimes I would wake to find the house empty, their absence unexplained. Hours later, they would return carrying shopping bags, laughing about something I hadn't witnessed. Where did you go? I asked once. Just out, Vanessa replied lightly. We didn't think you'd be interested. Not interested. How easy it was for them to decide what I did and did not want, what I did and did not deserve to know. I found myself eating meals alone, sitting in empty rooms, my presence reduced to an afterthought. The home that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a stage, where I had been demoted to an extra still there, but no longer part of the story. The worst moments, however, were with Daniel. He used to sit with me even briefly to share small updates about his day. But now, whenever I tried to start a conversation, his answers were short, distracted, always punctuated by the glow of his phone. How was work today? I asked one evening. Fine. Anything interesting happen? Not really. Then silence, his attention drifting back to Vanessa. It wasn't just that he excluded me, it was that he no longer seemed to notice he was doing it. One night, after they had gone to bed, I sat alone in the dark kitchen. The clock ticked on the wall and the refrigerator hummed. I stared at the empty chairs at the table that had once held laughter and conversation, now barren. The truth sank in with brutal clarity. I wasn't just being excluded, I was being erased. And that realization terrified me more than anything Vanessa had ever said. Because when people erase you, they make it easier to forget you altogether, to justify abandoning you, to walk away without guilt. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle. My heart ached, but underneath the ache was something else, something fierce, something unbroken. I whispered to myself, they think they can make me invisible. But I have lived too long, sacrificed too much to vanish quietly. The isolation they forced upon me was not the end. It was the beginning of something else, something they would never see coming. Because even shadows can find ways to step back into the light. And I was done being their shadow. The first real crack in the facade of silence came not from inside the house, but from outside it. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the air felt heavy with an unspoken storm. I was in the garden, kneeling among the roses I had planted years ago, trying to lose myself in the small comfort of pruning and tending. The soil under my fingernails, the smell of earth, the brush of petals against my skin. These things grounded me, gave me purpose when everything else seemed to unravel. That's when I heard the soft creak of the gate. Margaret. I looked up to see Mrs. Langley, my neighbor from 2 houses down. She was a thin woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She clutched a grocery bag in one hand, her expression somewhere between concern and hesitation. "Hello, Evelyn," I said, brushing dirt from my palms. "Out for errands." She nodded but didn't smile. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I don't want to meddle, Margaret, but I overheard something, and I think you should know." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Mrs. Langley glanced around nervously as though the garden itself might be listening. "I was walking past your porch yesterday evening. The window was open. I heard Vanessa on the phone. The mention of Vanessa's name sent a cold shiver down my spine." "What did she say?" "She was laughing," Mrs. Langley whispered. "Talking to someone I couldn't tell who. But she said she couldn't wait to push the old woman out and finally have the house to themselves. She said you were just dead weight. And that soon, Daniel would understand." The word struck me like a blow to the chest. Dead weight. Push the old woman out. For a moment, the garden spun. I gripped the edge of the flower bed to steady myself, my breath shallow. Mrs. Langley touched my arm gently. "I know it's not my place, but I thought you should hear it. I'm sorry, Margaret." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Thank you, Evelyn. Truly." She gave me a sorrowful look before walking away, her footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I remained there in the garden long after she left, staring at the roses. The world around me seemed to blur colors, fading into a wash of gray. Vanessa's words echoed in my mind, circling like vultures. "Push the old woman out. Dead weight." When I finally returned inside, the house felt different no longer, simply cold but hostile. Every corner seemed to hum with Vanessa's voice, every wall ready to close in on me. I moved quietly, almost afraid of making noise. Vanessa was upstairs on a call, her laughter floating down the staircase like the crack of a whip. Daniel hadn't come home yet. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, listening. "Of course it'll work," Vanessa was saying. "She's too weak to fight it. Daniel just needs a little more convincing, and then she'll be gone. Finally, some peace." Her tone was casual, confident. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation. I felt my stomach twist. She wasn't just cruel in passing remarks. She wasn't just trying to isolate me. She had a plan, a deliberate, calculated plan to erase me. That night, when Daniel returned, I tried to speak to him. "Daniel," I said softly, meeting him in the kitchen. "I need to ask you something." He loosened his tie, sighing. "What is it, Mom?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. "If Vanessa asked you to choose between her and me, would you—" He froze, his eyes narrowing. "Why would you even ask that?" "Because I heard her," I said, my voice breaking. "I heard her planning to push me out, Daniel. She doesn't want me here. She doesn't want me at all. And I'm afraid you'll let her." He slammed the fridge door shut, his voice sharp. "Enough, Mom. You're imagining things. Vanessa isn't like that." "I heard her," I cried. "And Mrs. Langley heard her too. She called me dead weight. She said she would push me out." "That's enough," Daniel roared, his face red. "Stop trying to turn me against my wife. Just stop." The kitchen fell into silence, his anger ringing louder than any slap could. I stared at him, my chest aching. For years I had dreamed of seeing him stand tall, strong, confident. But never did I imagine his strength would be turned against me. Later that night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the photograph of Daniel as a little boy. His hair had been messy, his cheeks round with childhood, his smile bright with innocence. I remembered how he used to run to me after school, arms open wide, shouting, "Mommy." I remembered the way he clung to my hand at the doctor's office, his tiny fingers trusting mine to guide him. Now those same hands slammed doors in my face. That same voice told me to stop imagining things. The boy I raised had become a man who chose silence, who chose blindness, who chose her. And in the darkness of that room, I realized something chilling. Vanessa wasn't wrong. I was weak. I was vulnerable. And if I didn't find a way to protect myself, she would succeed in erasing me. The following days, I became more observant. I noticed the way Vanessa spoke to Daniel when she thought I wasn't listening. Subtle suggestions slipped into conversations. "Wouldn't it be nice if we had the whole place to ourselves?" Or, It's hard to really live our lives with extra responsibilities. I noticed how she rearranged the house, shifting my things into corners, boxing up items she deemed unnecessary. My books vanished from the living room shelf. The Afghan I had knitted was folded and stored away in a closet. Even the family photos once proudly displayed were replaced with newer frames, ones that featured only her and Daniel. Piece by piece, she was erasing me. One evening, as I passed by their bedroom door, I caught her voice again, low and sharp. "She's clinging on, but not for long. Trust me, Daniel. We'll figure it out. We don't owe her anything." I pressed my back against the wall, my breath shallow. We don't owe her anything. How many times had I heard those words in different forms from both of them, from Vanessa as cruelty, from Daniel as dismissal. But hearing them together in unison was unbearable. I stumbled back to my room, closing the door quietly behind me. For a long time I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands pressed to my face, tears spilling down. It was one thing to be excluded. It was another to be mocked. But this was annihilation. A deliberate decision to remove me, to strip me of my place, my voice, my very existence. But as the tears dried, something else stirred inside me. I remembered Vanessa's words. "She's too weak to fight it." And suddenly I felt a spark. Weakness was what she saw. Weakness was what she counted on. But weakness was not all I was. I had survived abandonment, poverty, years of struggle. I had raised a son on my own, carried the weight of two lives when one nearly broke me. Weak, no. Tired, yes. Bruised, yes, but not weak. And if Vanessa thought she could erase me quietly, she was wrong. I would not be pushed out. I would not vanish. And I would make sure that when the time came, she would regret underestimating me. I had promised myself I wouldn't do it. I had whispered again and again in the quiet of my room, "Don't sink to her level. Don't give her the satisfaction." But there comes a point when silence is no longer dignity, it is surrender. And I had surrendered enough already. The day of the confrontation began like any other. I rose early, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window watching the street outside come alive. Children on bicycles, neighbors walking dogs, the mailman making his rounds. Ordinary life moved on effortlessly while mine seemed suspended in constant tension. By mid-morning, Vanessa came down the stairs dressed immaculately as always, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She was on her phone, laughing in that honeyed tone she reserved for everyone but me. When she noticed me sitting there, she ended the call abruptly, her smile vanishing as though it had been a mask slipped off too soon. "You're up early," she remarked, her tone dripping with something colder than casual observation. "I couldn't sleep," I said evenly, watching her carefully. "Well," she sighed, reaching for a bottle of water from the fridge, "try not to look so grim. It brings the whole house down." That was the moment. I felt something in me snap, as brittle and final as glass breaking. "Vanessa," I said sharply, my voice stronger than I expected. "We need to talk." She froze for half a second, then turned slowly, her lips curving into a smirk. "Oh, about what?" "About you," I replied. "About the way you've treated me, the way you speak to me, the things you've said about pushing me out of my own home." For a flicker of a moment, surprise crossed her face, but only for a flicker. Then she laughed. The sound was cruel, ringing through the kitchen like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Oh, Margaret," she said mockingly, setting the bottle on the counter. "You really do have too much time on your hands. Spying, eavesdropping, twisting words in that tired old head of yours. You should try knitting more. It keeps people quiet." Her laughter filled the room, but my chest burned with indignation. "Don't deny it. I heard you. And so did Mrs. Langley. You called me dead weight. You said you'd push me out." Her eyes glittered with malicious delight. "And so what if I did?" The words hung in the air like poison. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had finally said it, not in whispers, not in veiled barbs, but out loud directly to me. "You don't even deny it," I whispered. She stepped closer, her perfume suffocating her smile sharp. "Why should I? It's the truth. You are dead weight, Margaret. This is my house now. Daniel's and mine. And the sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for all of us. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. Her words pierced through me, slicing through every layer of pride I had left. This is my home too, I said, my voice shaking. I built this with my own hands. Every corner of this house carries my sacrifices. Her laughter returned louder this time, echoing through the kitchen. Sacrifices. Don't make me laugh. You think because you worked a few jobs and raised a son the world owes you something, newsflash. Margaret, nobody owes you anything. Not me, not Daniel. You're a relic clinging to a life that doesn't want you anymore. Her words landed like blows, each one heavier than the last. I wanted to scream, to strike her, to shake her, until she understood the depth of my pain. But I stood frozen, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. You're cruel, I whispered. No, she corrected, her eyes narrowing. I'm honest. And honesty hurts, doesn't it? You can't handle the fact that Daniel has his own life now that you're no longer the center of his world. You had your time. Now step aside. Her words twisted in my gut, feeding every insecurity I had tried so hard to bury. For years, I had clung to the belief that my sacrifices meant something, that they had carved out a place for me in Daniel's heart that no one could take away. But Vanessa was tearing that belief apart, stripping it bare until I was left standing there, questioning everything. At that moment, Daniel walked into the room. What's going on? He asked, glancing between us. Vanessa's demeanor changed instantly. She softened her voice, widened her eyes, played the role of the loving wife. Oh, nothing, darling. Your mother's just upset again. She cast me a pointed look, daring me to speak. I opened my mouth, but the words lodged in my throat. Daniel's tired face, his weary eyes. It was as though he had already chosen which version of the truth he wanted to believe. And it wasn't mine. He sighed, shaking his head. Mom, please. I don't want more arguments. Vanessa slipped her arm through his, resting her head on his shoulder. Exactly. Arguments are exhausting. We should be focusing on each other, not drama. Her voice was saccharine, and Daniel nodded, already convinced. I stood there in silence, my heart splintering. When they left the kitchen, I collapsed into the nearest chair, pressing my trembling hands against my face. I had thought confronting her would give me power, that exposing her cruelty would at least make her falter. But instead, she had laughed. She had mocked me. And she had turned Daniel further against me with her performance. The humiliation was suffocating. I felt small, insignificant, like a shadow fading in my own home. Her laughter echoed in my ears long after she left, taunting me, reminding me of just how powerless she believed I was. For a moment, I considered giving up. Packing my bags, leaving quietly, vanishing into some corner of the world where her voice couldn't reach me. But then I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had cooked countless meals for Daniel as a boy, where I had taught him to do his homework at the table, where I had stayed up late scrubbing dishes just so he could have a clean home to grow in. This was my house too, and I would not be laughed out of it. That night, as I lay in bed, Vanessa's words circled in my mind like a storm. Dead weight, relic, step aside. But instead of breaking me, something else began to grow. A fire. If she thought I was weak, then I would let her believe it. If she thought I was powerless, then I would let her laugh. But beneath that laughter, I would build something quietly, carefully, patiently. Because I had one advantage Vanessa didn't. I knew what it meant to endure. I had endured abandonment, poverty, loneliness. I had endured 1,000 humiliations to raise Daniel. And I could endure her cruelty too for a while longer. But not forever. Because one day soon I would strike back. And when I did, she would never laugh at me again. It began with a fever. At first, I thought it was nothing more than fatigue, the kind that settled deep into my bones after too many sleepless nights and too many days spent forcing myself to hold a straight back in a house that no longer felt like home. My head ached, my joints burned, and every breath felt heavier than the last. But by the second evening, the fever had me pinned to the bed, my skin clammy and my body trembling beneath the blankets. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter drifting from downstairs, Vanessa's high, tinkling laugh mingling with Daniel's deeper chuckles. The smell of roasted chicken wafted up through the floorboards, rich and savory. I hadn't eaten all day. I told myself they'll come check on me. They'll notice I'm gone. But the hours dragged on and no footsteps came. No knock on the door. No gentle voice asking if I was all right. By midnight, I realized they hadn't even noticed my absence. The next morning, I mustered the strength to shuffle downstairs, leaning heavily on the banister. My vision blurred at the edges, and I gripped the wood rail as though it were the only thing tethering me to the earth. When I reached the kitchen, Vanessa sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, a cup of coffee steaming in front of her. Daniel had already left for work. She glanced up, her perfectly groomed eyebrows arching. Well, look who decided to join the living. I'm sick, I managed to whisper, my throat raw. I need help. Her lips curled into a faint smile, more cruel than amused. Help Margaret, everyone gets sick. Take some aspirin, drink water. You'll survive. I blinked, swaying slightly, expecting her to rise to show even a shred of compassion. But she returned her gaze to the glowing screen of her phone, as though I were nothing more than a shadow in the room. I stumbled to the counter, pouring myself a glass of water, my hands trembling so badly the glass nearly slipped. Could you make me some tea? I asked quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. Vanessa didn't look up. I'm busy. Busy. She scrolled, tapped, sipped her coffee. And I stood there, weak and dizzy, realizing that the woman I had welcomed into my home would sooner watch me collapse than lift a hand to help me. I returned to my room, each step heavier than the last, and crawled back beneath the covers. The fever raged, sweat soaking through my nightgown, and tears slipped down my cheeks, not from the illness but from the coldness that surrounded me. That evening, I overheard her talking on the phone again. Her voice carried easily through the thin walls. She's sick now, she said with a chuckle. Barely made it down the stairs this morning. Honestly, it might solve our problem faster than I thought. One less person to worry about. Silence followed, then more laughter. I pressed my pillow against my face to stifle the sob that tore from my chest. The third night of fever was the worst. My body ached, my head pounded, and I drifted in and out of delirium. I dreamed of Daniel as a boy running into my arms, his small voice calling Mommy. I dreamed of nights when I carried him in my arms through storms, shielding him from the cold. But when I opened my eyes, the room was dark and empty. No one came. No one cared. I was alone. By dawn, I understood something with a clarity that pierced through the haze of illness. If I waited for them to care for me, I would die waiting. The thought was terrifying, but it also sparked something fierce within me. I had survived worse. I had survived being abandoned by Daniel's father, surviving on scraps and sheer willpower to raise a child alone. I had survived humiliation, exhaustion, and years of being overlooked. I could survive this too, but I could no longer trust anyone else to protect me. When the fever finally broke, I rose from bed shakily, my body drained, but my resolve sharper than it had been in years. I stood in front of the mirror, studying the pale-lined face that stared back. You are not dead weight, I whispered to my reflection. You are not invisible. You are not weak. The woman in the mirror looked fragile. Yes, but behind her eyes was something Vanessa would never understand: endurance. At breakfast, Vanessa breezed into the kitchen, surprised to see me sitting at the table with a cup of tea I had made myself. Oh, she said with mock cheer, you're still here. I met her gaze, steady and unblinking. For once, I didn't flinch. Yes, I replied calmly, I'm still here. She narrowed her eyes, unsettled by the steadiness in my voice. She expected weakness. She expected me to crumble. But I had found a new kind of strength in my sickness, the kind that comes when you realize you have nothing left to lose. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of all the years I had given Daniel. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment I had poured into his future. And now, when I needed even a fraction of that devotion returned, he was silent, and she was cruel. The bitterness settled in my chest, heavy but clarifying. They wanted me gone, but if they thought I would go quietly, they were wrong. I would no longer wait for their kindness. I would no longer beg for their respect. From that moment on, I would protect myself. And one day soon, I would make them see exactly what it meant to underestimate Margaret Ellis. The fever had taken something from me, yes, but it had also given me something unexpected: clarity. I realized lying alone in that bed with sweat soaking the sheets that waiting for compassion was useless. Vanessa's cruelty was deliberate. Daniel's silence was a choice. And I, if I wanted to survive, if I wanted to reclaim even a shred of dignity, had to become something different. Not a victim, not a ghost in my own home, a planner. And so I began my hidden plan. It started with a small notebook. I pulled it from an old drawer, its cover faded and pages yellowed. Once I had used it to jot down lesson plans when I was still teaching. Now it became my ledger of truth. Every time Vanessa slipped, every time she let the mask fall, I wrote it down. March 3rd, Vanessa said at breakfast. You're dead weight. One wrong step, and you'll be a burden for life. March 6th. She told Daniel I was exaggerating my illness when I could barely stand. March 10th. Overheard her telling a friend on the phone she'd find a way to push me out soon. Line by line, date by date, I filled the pages. At first it felt foolish scribbles of pain on paper. But soon the notebook became something else. A weapon. Proof. Evidence that I was not imagining things, not twisting words in some bitter haze of old age. But words alone would not be enough. Vanessa was clever. She would twist them, deny them, smile sweetly while she painted me as paranoid. So I turned to something stronger. Daniel had once set up small security cameras around the house after a string of neighborhood break-ins. Most had been neglected, over time gathering dust. I quietly checked them when no one was home, and to my surprise, a few still worked. The one in the kitchen, the one by the hallway. That evening, while Vanessa chatted loudly on her phone in the living room, I slipped in quietly and adjusted the angle of the hallway camera just enough to catch the dining area where most of her venom spilled when Daniel wasn't around. The little blinking red light felt like an ally. From that day forward, I lived two lives: the weak, silent Margaret they believed they controlled, and the watchful Margaret collecting piece by piece the story of their betrayal. The first recording came just 2 days later. Vanessa standing in the kitchen speaking into her phone. She's getting worse. Honestly, I don't know why she even tries anymore. Once Daniel sees how much of a drag she is, he'll have no problem letting her go. I sat in the corner, knitting silently, my face blank while the camera caught every word. Another night, after a dinner where I had once again been excluded from conversation, she muttered under her breath while washing dishes, I swear if I have to look at that miserable face one more night, I'll scream. The camera caught it. Each clip became another brick in the wall of truth I was building. Daniel remained blind, of course. Whenever I tried to hint at Vanessa's cruelty, he brushed it aside, dismissing me with weary sighs and tired excuses. But I noticed something else, too. He was growing more distant. Conversations with him grew shorter, colder, as though he resented my very presence. Vanessa's poison was seeping into him drop by drop. One evening, when I asked him if he would join me for tea the way he used to, he shook his head and muttered, Mom, you make everything so heavy. Can't you just let us live our lives? I wanted to scream, to shake him, to force him to see. But instead I nodded quietly, hiding the sting behind calm eyes. Because I had learned arguing with him was useless. Showing him the truth would be my only weapon. The notebook filled quickly. Dates, words, moments. Vanessa locking the fridge one afternoon when she thought I wasn't looking. Vanessa laughing about me to her friends. Vanessa telling Daniel she'll be gone soon. Just wait. I became meticulous, almost obsessive. Each entry was written with the precision of a teacher grading papers, clear, exact, unshakable. And slowly I began to gather witnesses. Mrs. Langley, who had overheard Vanessa's phone call. The cashier at the grocery store who once saw Vanessa sneer at me and say, "Why don't you hurry up, old woman?" My own doctor who noted in my file how poorly cared for I seemed during my fever. One day these voices would matter. But in the meantime, I had to endure. Vanessa sensed something in me had changed. She would watch me closely, her eyes narrowing when I didn't flinch as easily when I no longer argued back. "You're awfully quiet these days," she said one afternoon, studying me like a cat studies a mouse. "Silence is peaceful," I replied, simply returning to my knitting. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like it. She thrived on reaction, on breaking me piece by piece. But my stillness unsettled her. Good. At night alone in my room, I would open the notebook and read through my entries, reminding myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't invisible, that my suffering was real and soon it would be undeniable. I would watch the clips from the camera, Vanessa's sharp voice filling the screen. Each time I replayed them, I felt my resolve harden. This was no longer just survival. This was preparation. The breaking point came one evening when I overheard Vanessa whispering to Daniel in their room. "She's a parasite," she hissed. "The sooner she's gone, the better. Don't you want a life that's ours, Daniel, without her dragging us down?" My son's response was muffled, but I heard enough. I don't know what to do. I pressed my hand to the wall, tears streaming silently down my face. They were planning my erasure together now. But instead of despair, I felt an almost eerie calm. Because this time I wasn't empty-handed. I had the words, the dates, the witnesses, the recordings. I had the truth. And when the time came, I would not whisper it. I would reveal it in full daylight, where no denial could survive, where Vanessa's smirk would finally falter, where Daniel would be forced to see. As I closed the notebook that night, I whispered into the darkness, "How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone?" And in the silence that followed, I almost thought I heard Vanessa's laughter falter. Change, when it comes, is rarely dramatic. It is subtle, like a shift in the wind that bends the trees ever so slightly before the storm arrives. That's how it began in our house. I was still Margaret, the quiet, aging mother-in-law who sat in corners, drank tea, and knitted in silence. But there was something in my silence now that unsettled Vanessa. She sensed it, and like a predator who smells fear or resistance, she began circling more cautiously. I remember the first time she confronted me about it. "You've been different lately," she remarked one morning, leaning against the kitchen counter with her coffee mug in hand. "Quieter than usual." I didn't look up from the teacup I was washing. "Isn't that what you wanted?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "Don't be smart with me, Margaret. I'm just saying it's unusual. People don't just change overnight." I dried the cup carefully, taking my time. "Maybe I've learned it's better to keep to myself." She studied me with narrowed eyes, suspicious but uncertain. That was the key. She didn't know what had shifted, only that something had. And uncertainty, I realized, was its own kind of power. Daniel, on the other hand, noticed nothing. Or perhaps he noticed and chose not to. He was so buried in his work, his marriage, his desperate desire for peace, that he refused to look deeper. One evening, as I sat in the living room knitting, he came home later than usual, his tie loosened, exhaustion etched into his face. "Long day?" I asked gently. He nodded, collapsing onto the couch. "Always." I studied him for a moment, my heart aching. "You know, not everything has to fall on your shoulders, Daniel." He gave me a tired smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mom, but it's fine." Then Vanessa swept in all bright energy and false sweetness, and he immediately leaned into her orbit as though my words had never existed. It was during those evenings that the storm truly began to gather. Vanessa grew restless. My silence frustrated her. My calm unnerved her. She thrived on my pain, my visible cracks. But when I sat with quiet dignity documenting her cruelty in secret, she lost her footing. One night after dinner, she slammed a pot onto the counter with more force than necessary. "Don't just sit there knitting, Margaret. You could at least help with the dishes." I rose slowly, steadying myself. "Of course." But instead of snapping back, instead of giving her the satisfaction of anger, I washed each dish with meticulous care, humming softly to myself. Her eyes narrowed. "What's gotten into you?" "Nothing," I said, simply setting a plate on the drying rack. But inside, I smiled. Because I knew she could feel it, the balance shifting ever so slightly against her. The tension spilled into smaller moments too. She began double-checking the room, suspicious of how tidy I kept them. Once I caught her rifling through the drawer in my bedroom while she thought I was outside. She jumped when I entered, masking her guilt with an exaggerated laugh. "Oh, I was just looking for extra blankets," she said. I didn't challenge her. I didn't reveal that I knew exactly what she was searching for. Instead, I nodded and handed her the folded quilt from the closet. She walked away unsettled. She was looking for my secrets, but she would never find them. Meanwhile, Daniel grew more distant. My relationship with him felt like a thread stretched to its breaking point. He still spoke to me politely, but his words were brief, distracted. He avoided lingering in the same room too long, as though my presence weighed on him. I could see Vanessa's influence in the way his eyes flicked between us, the way his jaw tensed whenever I spoke. He wanted to believe in peace, but peace built on denial is nothing more than silence, forced upon the weaker voice. And in his eyes, I was always the weaker voice. One Sunday afternoon, a storm raged outside, thunder rolling through the sky as rain battered the windows. Vanessa sat curled on the couch beside Daniel, scrolling through her phone, while I watched the storm from my chair by the window. The power flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a moment before the lights returned. "Ugh," Vanessa groaned. "If the power goes out, we'll have to light candles." "How quaint." She shot me a glance, smirking. "Right up your alley, Margaret." I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. For once, I didn't drop my eyes. "Yes," I said calmly, "quaint, but sometimes the old ways are stronger than the new." For the first time, her smirk faltered. Daniel glanced between us, confused. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," Vanessa said quickly, looping her arm through his. "Just nonsense." But I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. That night, I added another entry to my notebook. April the 2nd. Vanessa mocked me again, but I didn't react. She is growing suspicious of my silence. Daniel still refuses to see. I closed the notebook with a firm hand, my resolve stronger than ever. The storm inside the house was growing, each moment of suspicion, each sidelong glance, each word left unspoken, adding to the thunderclouds gathering above us. And soon I knew the lightning would strike. Vanessa couldn't resist needling me, testing me. She left hints, little barbs, to see if I would react. "You really should consider moving into one of those senior apartments," she said one morning. "You'd have people your own age to talk to. You wouldn't feel so left out." I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. "Why would I feel left out? I'm right here." Her smile tightened. "Right. Of course." The unease in her eyes was unmistakable. I began to notice her watching me more closely. Her gaze lingered when I wrote in my notebook, though I made sure to scribble recipes or knitting patterns when she was near. She lingered at my door sometimes, listening, trying to catch something. But I had lived too long, suffered too much, not to know how to guard myself. Daniel remained blind to it all. Or perhaps willfully blind. When I tried to speak to him about Vanessa's growing hostility, he sighed and muttered, "You're reading too much into things, Mom." But in his eyes, I saw something else: weariness, fear. He didn't want to confront the truth, because it would mean dismantling the fragile peace he clung to. And so he remained silent. The storm gathered thick and heavy, pressing down on all of us. Vanessa restless and suspicious, Daniel blind and weary, and me quiet, watchful, patient. I knew it couldn't last forever. And deep down I welcomed the storm. Because when it broke, it would finally expose everything. The night of the family dinner had been Vanessa's idea, or so she said. "We should invite everyone over," she announced one afternoon, her tone syrupy sweet as she stirred sugar into her coffee. "It's been too long since we've hosted. Everyone will see how well we're doing." Daniel smiled wearily, nodding. It could be nice. And so it was decided. Relatives would come, cousins, an aunt or two, even Daniel's uncle, who rarely visited. Vanessa was thrilled at the thought of parading her life, her marriage, her curated image of perfection. She bustled around the house in the days leading up, scrubbing surfaces, rearranging furniture, buying fresh flowers. I watched her quietly, my heart beating with a steady rhythm of anticipation. Because for me, this dinner would not be a celebration. It would be a reckoning. On the evening itself, the house filled with voices and laughter, the clink of glasses, the aroma of roasted meats and fresh bread. Vanessa floated among the guests like a queen at court, her laughter ringing above the rest, her hand always lightly resting on Daniel's arm. "You've done so well for yourself," one relative remarked to her. "Oh, thank you," she beamed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Daniel and I have worked hard. It's not easy, but we've built something wonderful together." I sat at the end of the table, silent, watching. Her mask was flawless. To them, she was charming, gracious, loving. Only I knew the venom beneath that smile, the cruelty that dripped from her words when no one else was around. And tonight I would reveal it. The meal went on. Toasts were made, stories shared, glasses refilled. But when dessert was served, I rose slowly, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of what I was about to do. "Before we finish," I said softly, my voice carrying just enough to hush the table, "I'd like to say something." All eyes turned toward me. Vanessa smiled tightly, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "Of course, Margaret," she said, her tone polite but sharp at the edges. "Go ahead." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For months now, I have been told I am invisible in this house, that I am a burden, that I am, as Vanessa so kindly put it, dead weight. Gasps rippled across the table. Vanessa froze, her smile cracking ever so slightly. "I know how it sounds," I continued, my gaze sweeping the room. "It sounds unbelievable, because to you she is all charm and grace, but I have lived with her, and I have heard every word." Vanessa laughed nervously, raising her hands. "Oh, Margaret, don't be ridiculous. You must have misunderstood." "No," I said firmly, pulling a small folder from beneath my chair. "I didn't misunderstand. I documented it." The room went silent. I opened the folder and laid the notebook on the table, flipping to a page. My voice shook, but the words were steady. "March 3rd, Vanessa said at breakfast. You're dead weight. One wrong step, and you'll be a burden for life. March 10th. Overheard Vanessa telling a friend I'll find a way to push her out soon." I read entry after entry, my voice growing stronger with each one. Relatives exchanged shocked glances, their smiles fading. Vanessa's face paled. "And if my words aren't enough," I said, pulling out a small USB stick, "perhaps you'll believe her own voice." I handed it to Daniel's uncle, who quickly plugged it into his laptop. The speakers crackled, then filled the room with Vanessa's voice. "She's too weak to fight it. Daniel just needs a little more convincing, and then she'll be gone. Honestly, it might solve our problem faster if she gets sick. One less person to worry about." The room erupted in murmurs. Eyes widened, jaws tightened. Vanessa's mask shattered. She leapt to her feet, her voice shrill. "This is taken out of context. She's twisting everything. I was joking." "Joking?" I repeated, my voice icy. "You call telling your friends I should rot alone a joke." Relatives stared at her, their gazes no longer admiring, but condemning. Daniel sat frozen, his face pale, his mouth slightly open as if words had abandoned him. He looked from me to Vanessa, his world crumbling. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice trembling with both pain and resolve, "I carried you in my arms when your father left us. I gave everything I had so you could have a future. And this woman has been poisoning you against me, mocking me, erasing me. You've been blind. But not anymore." Tears welled in my eyes, but I did not let them fall. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by Vanessa's stammering. She's lying. She's making this all up." But the recordings betrayed her. Her own voice, dripping with cruelty, played again and again. One aunt shook her head. "I can't believe you, Vanessa. We thought you were such a blessing to this family." Another relative muttered, "Disgraceful." Vanessa's face twisted with desperation. She turned to Daniel. "Say something. Tell them this isn't true." But Daniel sat in silence, his hands clenched on the table, his eyes staring at the USB stick as though it burned. For the first time, he couldn't look at her. I lowered myself back into my chair, my body trembling, my breath shaky. But inside, a quiet strength rose like a tide. I had spoken, I had revealed the truth. And though I had been humiliated, mocked, dismissed, I was no longer invisible. The dinner ended in chaos. Relatives excused themselves early, their expressions tight with disappointment. Some hugged me quietly before leaving their eyes filled with sympathy. None spoke to Vanessa. Daniel disappeared into the study, shutting the door. Vanessa stormed upstairs, her footsteps pounding like thunder. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by empty plates and shattered illusions. For years I had endured in silence, but tonight I had finally broken it. And though I knew the storm wasn't over, that Vanessa would strike back, that Daniel would struggle with his loyalty, I also knew something had changed forever. The truth was out, and truth has a way of tearing down even the strongest masks. The house was unnaturally quiet after the family dinner. Relatives had left in stiff silence, their faces pale with shock, their voices clipped as they muttered goodbyes. The warm hum of laughter and conversation had drained from the walls, leaving behind a hollow emptiness that echoed louder than any storm. I sat at the dining table long after the last car pulled away, the remnants of dessert untouched in front of me. The USB stick still lay on the table, a small, ordinary object that had detonated like a bomb in the heart of our family. Vanessa had fled upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. Daniel had shut himself in the study, the muffled sound of pacing footsteps drifting through the walls. And I remained where I was, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trembling slightly but steady at my core. I had spoken my truth. I had revealed her mask. And now I waited. It was Daniel who emerged first. His footsteps were slow, hesitant, the weight of his silence pressing against the air as he walked into the dining room. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at me as though I were someone he no longer recognized. "Mom," he said finally, his voice low, almost hoarse. I looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, I saw something in them I thought I had lost forever: doubt. Doubt in her. Doubt in the story she had woven around him like a web. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered. "God, I didn't want to. But it was her voice. Her words. Not yours." My chest tightened, tears pricking my eyes. "Daniel." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I let her convince me that you were exaggerating, that you were too sensitive, that you wanted to make her look bad. But I heard it tonight. I can't ignore it anymore." His voice cracked. "I failed you, Mom." Before I could answer, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Vanessa burst into the room, her eyes blazing, her face twisted with fury. "Failed her!" She snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Don't you dare say that, Daniel. She's manipulating you. She's been manipulating you since the beginning." Daniel flinched at her words but didn't look away from me. Vanessa turned on me, her finger pointed like a dagger. "You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting there with your little notebook, your pathetic recordings. You think you've won." I didn't rise. I didn't flinch. I simply held her gaze, calm and steady. Her mask had cracked beyond repair. Gone was the sweet, smiling wife who charmed relatives and neighbors. In her place stood the woman I had always known, the one who laughed at my illness, who called me dead weight, who wanted me erased. And now Daniel could see it too. "Vanessa, stop," Daniel said firmly, his voice trembling but resolute. She spun toward him, her eyes wide with desperation. "Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn you against me, against your own wife." Daniel's jaw clenched. "No. I see what you've been doing. I see it now." His words cut through the air, sharp and final. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Daniel, you can't mean that. After everything." After everything, his voice rose, years of suppressed frustration breaking free. "After months of you mocking her, isolating her, poisoning me against my own mother, after lying to my face, laughing behind my back. You think that's everything worth saving." Her lips trembled, words forming but never landing. She had lost her script. I had imagined this moment for so long, imagined Daniel finally seeing the truth, imagined her mask tearing away. But as I watched it unfold, my heart ached, because beneath my quiet triumph was sorrow. Sorrow that it had come to this, that my son had been blinded for so long, that our home had become a battlefield. Still, I couldn't deny the relief coursing through me as Daniel turned fully toward me, his voice softening. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said again. "I let you down." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I smiled faintly. "You see now. That's enough." Vanessa, however, wasn't finished. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "All of you. You think you've exposed me? Fine. But don't think for a second I'll go quietly." She grabbed her purse from the counter, shoving her arms into her coat with frantic movements. "You'll see what life is like without me, Daniel. You'll crawl back. They always do." Her heels clicked furiously against the floor as she stormed toward the door. Daniel didn't move to stop her. Neither did I. The door slammed shut with a finality that reverberated through the house. And just like that, the storm broke. The hours that followed were quiet. Too quiet. Daniel sat across from me at the table, his face buried in his hands. I watched him silently, giving him the space to unravel the web that had entangled him for so long. Finally, he spoke. "How did I not see it? How did I let her control me like that?" "Because love can blind us," I said gently. "Because we want to believe the best in the people we choose. And because she was clever. Cruel, but clever." He lifted his head, his eyes red. "You should hate me for what I let happen to you." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "I don't hate you. I just wanted you to see. And now you do." His hand tightened around mine, trembling. The next morning, relatives called. Word had spread quickly about the dinner, the recordings, the mask that had fallen so spectacularly. "She's ruined," one cousin murmured over the phone. "No one will look at her the same way again." "She did it to herself," I replied calmly. There was no satisfaction in my voice, only a quiet acknowledgement of truth. Because the collapse wasn't mine, it was hers. Daniel remained shaken for days. He moved through the house like a man waking from a long, troubled dream. Sometimes he apologized again, his voice thick with guilt. Sometimes he sat in silence, staring into the distance. I didn't press him. Healing takes time. Truth takes time to settle. But one evening, as we sat together in the living room, he turned to me with a look I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Vulnerable. Needing. "Will you forgive me?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything we had endured. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Daniel. But, yes, if you promise never to let me be invisible again, then yes. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. Never again. And though my heart still bore scars, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. The house was quieter without her laughter, yes. But in the quiet, there was honesty. And honesty, no matter how painful, was better than living beneath her shadow. Vanessa's mask had collapsed. Her reputation, her marriage, her place in the family, all of it crumbled in one night. And though I didn't know where her rage would carry her next, I knew one thing for certain: she would never again laugh at me, never again mock me, as though I were powerless. Because I had shown her and everyone else that Margaret Ellis was not dead weight. I was the root that had held this family together. And I was still standing. In the days after Vanessa stormed out of the house, I found myself walking through rooms that felt both emptier and freer. Her perfume no longer clung to the curtains. Her sharp laughter no longer echoed through the hallways. Even the air felt lighter, as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath and were finally allowed to exhale. For the first time in months, I could sit in the living room without feeling scrutinized. I could cook a meal without hearing her dismissive comments. I could simply exist without being mocked, without being erased. And yet the silence also carried a heaviness. Because while Vanessa's absence felt like relief, the scars she left behind still throbbed. My son's silence, his blindness, his willingness to let me suffer, it haunted me more than any insult Vanessa had ever spoken. Daniel tried. I will give him that. He tried to bridge the gap, to sit with me more, to speak with me in a way that acknowledged my presence instead of avoiding it. But guilt is a strange poison. It makes every conversation feel heavier, every apology falter beneath the weight of what cannot be undone. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, he said quietly, "Mom, do you think I'll ever make it up to you?" I looked at him for a long moment, studying the lines of exhaustion on his face, the boy I once knew, still flickering beneath the man he had become. You can't make up for the past, I said gently, but you can choose differently in the future. That's all any of us can do. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening, and in that moment I realized that forgiveness is not a single act, but a choice we make again and again. Vanessa, for her part, did not disappear quietly. I heard whispers from relatives, from neighbors. She told anyone who would listen that I had tricked them all, that I had twisted her words, that I was a bitter old woman who couldn't let go of control. But her words carried no weight anymore, because the truth had already been laid bare, and the evidence spoke louder than any lie she could weave. People avoided her. Relatives stopped inviting her to gatherings. Friends distanced themselves. The woman who had once prided herself on appearances now wore the stain of her own cruelty. And me, I did not gloat. I did not revel in her collapse. Because revenge, when it comes, is not always sweet. Sometimes it tastes like ashes, heavy and bitter on the tongue. But what I did feel was something far more important: dignity. I had stood my ground. I had refused to vanish. I had shown them all that I was not weak, not invisible, not dead weight, and that was enough. The house slowly became a home again, though never quite the same. Scars lingered in the corners, memories etched into the walls, but there was peace. I tended to my garden more often, the roses blooming brighter than they had in years. I baked bread, the smell filling the kitchen with warmth. I even took walks with Mrs. Langley, who squeezed my hand one afternoon and said, "I knew you had more strength in you than anyone gave you credit for." Her words made me smile, because she was right. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, watchful. Sometimes it looks like survival when the world tries to erase you. And sometimes it looks like an old woman refusing to let herself be silenced. As weeks turned into months, Daniel began to heal too. The guilt softened, replaced by a renewed tenderness I had feared was lost forever. He checked on me more often, asked for my advice, even cooked with me in the kitchen like he had as a boy. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was something real. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, reclaiming not only my dignity, but my son. I often sit now by the window in the evenings, the soft glow of the sunset spilling across the living room. I hold my cup of tea, breathe in the quiet, and think about everything I have endured. The cruelty, the silence, the isolation, but also the strength of the plan, the truth. I am still here. I am still Margaret Ellis, and I am no longer invisible. Slow fade out, final reflection, plus. CTA, life has a way of testing us in the cruelest of ways, often through the very people we love the most. I had thought my battle would be with age, with loneliness, with the slow fading of time. But instead, my battle came from within my own family, my daughter-in-law's cruelty, my son's silence, the threat of being erased in my final years. But here's what I've learned. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. And truth, no matter how long it takes, has a way of cutting through lies. I may have been mocked, dismissed, and nearly broken, but I rose again, not with rage, but with quiet dignity. And that dignity, that refusal to vanish, is what saved me. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never let anyone convince you that you are invisible. Never let anyone reduce you to nothing. Because your voice, your life, your truth, they matter. Have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to fight for your dignity against those who should have protected you? If you were in my place, would you forgive? Or would you walk away? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth, where more stories like mine remind us all that even in betrayal, there can be strength.